But we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you. Thanks so much for uh, for joining our room here and for coming to learn more about our project, the Man House Museum. So I think you guys probably heard the introduction if you were coming to the room, but just to go over a little bit of that, my name is Jessica Baber, and I am the museum manager at the Mansfield Historical Museum and Man House Museum in Mansfield, Texas. And I'm going to be briefly discussing the process of opening the Man House Museum, which is the historic home of one of Mansfield's founders and namesakes, Ralph Mann. Just a bit about my own background. I've been working in the museum field for about 12 years, and I've worked in Native American tribal museums, as well as your more sort of traditional history museums, but definitely never a historic house museum. And so this was new territory for me. I started working for the city of Mansfield, which owns and operates both of the museums, those museums, in March of 2019. And then in May of 2019, 2 months later, I was told that the city had decided to turn the Man House, which they had owned for a few years at that point, but had never really decided what they were going to do with. They decided to turn it into a museum, and hey, I was in charge of figuring out how to turn it into a museum. And so it was definitely a new and exciting, but a little daunting situation. But we hit the ground running. We had a staff of 2 at that point. It was myself and a part-time employee, but several really devoted volunteers. And we got to work trying to learn as much as we possibly could about Ralph Mann and his family. We did a lot of research on the house itself and the property that he owned. And then we tried to learn what we could about Mansfield during the time that the house was built and that the family lived in the house, and then the surrounding area, and the sort of the surrounding area around Mansfield. That was sort of those are the topics that we decided that we were going to focus the story that we were going to tell at the museum. And so that is what we decided we were going to try to deep dive the research. And we were really lucky that over the years, the local historical society had been keeping records about Ralph Mann because as one of the town founders, he was a really important figure in Mansfield's history. So they had a lot of information in their archives and in their research library. And so we were able to draw on that to find valuable information. Of course, a lot of what we found were secondary sources, but they did have a few primary documents like family letters and church documents that we were able to glean a lot of good information from. And just so you guys know, Ralph Mann was a partner in a grist mill that was built around 1859. That's the picture on the right. He and his business partner, Julian Field, who is the other namesake of Mansfield, are credited with starting the town by establishing the business that the community really grew up around. The mill is really what started Mansfield. Field was the money behind the operation, but Mann ran the day-to-day at the mill. Mann was from a working class background in Charleston, South Carolina. He and Field actually married sisters from a wealthy family in East Texas. And so as we were able to find more information about him, we set out to furnish the museum. Unfortunately, the Mann family left Mansfield within the second generation. So Mann's children all left Mansfield, and they were all gone by the 1930s. And so we didn't have any furniture left to furnish our house. So we were really starting from scratch, which is, you know, I don't know if that's normal for historic house museums. I don't think it probably is. But because we knew about Mann, we knew about his, some at least, about his background. We knew about his wife's background. We knew about the local area, what maybe would have been available to them in that region at that time period. And so we were able to kind of take those pieces of information and start collecting items that we thought would have possibly been in their home. And so we found donations from the community. People were very generous with us. They were very excited about the project once word got out. And so people came out of the woodwork with things from the 1800s that they wanted to donate to us, which was wonderful to see the community kind of rally around it. But we did also purchase things from auctions and from antique stores. And so we were able to find sort of a house full of furniture. We also had a wonderful volunteer that we used. Oh my goodness, maybe overused. He was incredibly generous with us. He was very knowledgeable about furniture from this time period, and he helped us date a lot of things because it was certainly out of my wheelhouse. And so he helped us identify kind of things that were truly period appropriate. And he also helped us restore some items that were from the right time and were the type of items that we were looking for, but were kind of in poor condition. And so he was a real asset for us. So while all of this was going on, kind of behind the scenes, all of the incredible amount of work that we and our volunteers were doing, the house was being restored. The home was built between circa 1865 and 1870. It was built in 3 stages. First was a 1-room log house. And then a few years later, there was a 2-room brick structure built that had a parlor and a dining room. And so between the 2 buildings, there would have been an open air dog trot between them. And then a 3rd phase, they built the 2nd story, which had 2 bedrooms, and then enclosed everything to the structure that we have today. And so, so we think that that was all done within about a 5 to 7 year time period. If you look at these pictures, you can see on the left, the top picture is kind of before restoration, the bottom picture is during restoration. You'll see that there was a stacked stone, fieldstone chimney that was replaced. The original one fell in the 1960s, so that had to be redone. There was also the roof was changed back to what the original composition would have been. The center picture is actually taken from the entry to the house. There's an entry hall when you first walk in. On the left, on the top picture, you'll see it's just a white wall. It's got some wood that was put on in the mid 20th century. When they took that off, what was underneath and what's on the bottom picture, it was wallpaper we dated it from about the 1870s or the 1880s. It was hand stenciled and hand painted wallpaper that had been on that wall the whole time, and had just been covered up over the years, probably multiple times. Unfortunately, we weren't able to leave it up there just because it was in such bad condition, but we were able to keep some of it, and we're hoping to recreate it at some point in the future. On the right, it's just before and during restoration pictures of the parlor. Ralph Mann, actually, one of the things we found out is that he apprenticed um, as a carpenter, or as a kind of oh, the word's escaping me, but a like a fine woodworker, like a furniture maker, that sort of thing, in South Carolina before he moved to Texas. And so all of the interior doors in the house and the mantles are original, and they've all been attributed to him. And so that's just a good picture of one of the mantles in the house that he would have made. So after the restoration was completed and we found all of our furniture and we did a lot of our research, the house was opened in 2020. And these are just some pictures. There's the ribbon cutting. This is the picture of the parlor once it's done and opened with the furniture in it on the bottom there. The top right picture is the entry hall once it was completed. And then the bottom right is just a picture of the dining room. And so that is what the museum looks like today. Everything kind of came together, and it was a huge relief, of course, to have all of that done after 18 very frantic months of a lot of work, but incredibly rewarding experience, of course. But there's still a lot of work going on and a lot of work to be done, of course, like at any museum. And so anytime I talk to a group of people, I always share with them our volunteer opportunities that we have at the museum. And so we do have a docent program. So anybody who's actually in the Mansfield area, I would encourage to think about becoming a docent. We have people come in and actually train to be docents, to give tours of the house, to help with our special events. This is an event that happened at Christmas time, and that's why everybody's in period dress. That's not always the case when people give tours of the house, of course. But yeah, people come do it like a training session, shadow somebody who is already trained to give tours. They have to memorize all of our tour materials to become a docent. But we also have volunteer opportunities for people who don't want to go through all of that, but maybe just want to come and help with a, an education program or something like that. And so we can always use volunteers at the museum. The other thing that we can use help with is ongoing research projects. So I we'll be honest, at a certain point, kind of our team hit a wall research-wise. This was my first experience doing any kind of like real genealogical research or real like deep dive historical research. And so it was a surprise to me, but may not be a surprise to you guys, that it seems like the more you dig in and the more you kind of find out about somebody, the more you realize you don't know. And so it's like the more you find out, the more questions you end up having. So so we have, we've found a lot of answers, but now there's more and more questions that come up. And so this is just a few of the questions that we've got on our plate right now that we're trying to sort through, but don't have necessarily the resources to track down, either because we don't have the skill set or because we don't have like the time and the manpower to devote to it and to find the answers. We're trying to track down the Mann family descendants. For one, just to let them know about the museum. Hey, there's a museum that's dedicated to your ancestor, come and check it out. But also we're hoping maybe they have, photos that we could use at the museum. Maybe they actually even have furniture or things that would have been in the house that they would be willing to donate or let us take pictures of and reproduce to use in the house. That would be huge for us. And so we're really hoping to make some of those connections with living descendants of the Mann family. Another thing that we'd really love to know is if Mr. Mann owned slaves. Obviously, this is a man that came to Mansfield in the 1850s, lived there in the 60s. It's absolutely possible. And so that is part of the story that we want to make sure that we are including in our narrative at the house. And so, we are trying to figure that out and trying to track down that information and find a firm answer one way or the other to make sure that we are including that really important information. And then another thing is that at some point, Mr. Mann and Mr. Field, who were owners of this business and also brother-in-laws, apparently had a falling out. They split the business and went their separate ways, and nobody seems to have ever have known that in Mansfield. None of the resources that we had ever found or anything had that in there. The narrative had always been, oh, they were friends, they were, brothers-in-law. At one point, Field moved to another town and, whatever, but no, apparently it was kind of ugly and we have no idea why, or over what or anything like that. And we'd really like to know. And so, there are just little things like that we're trying to figure out, and could really use help of experienced people who are interested in doing research and finding those facts and are good at sorting through all of the data and all of that stuff. And so if you or anyone is interested in projects like that, please let us know. And then the last thing I just wanted to let you guys know about is that we do have a pretty great resource at our historical museum that I don't think a lot of people know about. And that's this research library that is maintained by the local historical society. And it has lots of great information in it. It's got obituary records, it's got newspaper clippings that start in the 1800s and go through the present day. It's got information about early families in Mansfield. It has yearbooks and church records. There are property abstracts, cemetery records. There are information about local veterans there. There's just all kinds of good information. And yeah, so if obviously it's Mansfield specific, but if you or anybody is looking for information about Mansfield, this is definitely stuff that is not online. It's not found anywhere else. So I would encourage you to take advantage of this resource. And that's everything that I have. If you've got any questions, feel free to unmute yourself and let me know. But otherwise, I'm gonna, give it a few minutes and we'll start the program again. Oh,
Jessica,
this is
thank
my
you.
contact info. Yeah.
Thank you. Really great story. How cool.
Ah,
So
thank
fun.
you so much.
I think it's so great that the city has decided that it's important. That's really cool.
I will absolutely give the city of Mansfield a lot of credit. I've, lived in a lot of towns and been, obviously interested in history in a lot of places, and yeah, the city of Mansfield has really put a lot of emphasis on historic preservation in a way that a lot of towns do not. And so that is actually one of the reasons that I took this job, is because, that's the direction they were going. And that's, yeah. It's
very good. Well, thank you for your presentation.
Yeah.
Fun stuff. Great. Take care.
Thank you so much.